Good evening and welcome to tonight's event. My name is Sarah Langbridge, New South Wales Business Development Consultant for Brickworks Building Products. And whether you are joining us here in Sydney or anywhere across the world, thank you for being with us this evening. In the spirit of reconciliation, Brickworks acknowledges the traditional owners of the lands on which we are all gathered and recognises their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. At Brickworks, we're proud to be able to provide a platform for sharing ideas and discussions surrounding architecture and design. Throughout the year, we will continue to bring you diverse events, both online as well as in person, hosted in our design studios located around the country. Tonight, it gives me great pleasure to welcome and introduce our guest speaker, Hannah Tribe of Tribe Studio Architects. I'm also pleased to be joined by architect, writer and educator, Stephen Varady. A huge thank you to you both for being with us this evening. Please welcome Stephen to now formally introduce Hannah.
Bay House overlooks Kyle Bay on the Georges River, which is about 20 kilometres south of Sydney. In terms of fitting in with the topography, I think that Bay House probably does stand out as being a little bit different, but it's still very modest in scale. We chose to use concrete blocks because I love the idea of a material having multiple functions.
The block work in this project has a home finish, which exposes the beautiful natural aggregates, and the fact they've been used both internally and externally means they don't require any extra finishes such as painting or plastering.
I think my favourite moment is that first point of entry and the stillness and calm that you experience when you see the hanging pendant lights and you take a moment to pause.
I think for me it's the way the product's been used to create a single materiality and a home that the homeowners will be able to enjoy forever.
Thank you, Sarah. It's a pleasure to be back in 2022 for our inDETAIL Architecture Talk series. Hannah Tribe is the founder and principal of Tribe Studio Architects. Established in 2003, Tribe Studio is now a widely respected and awarded Australian architecture practice, recognised for its inspiring, architecturally ambitious, intelligent and sustainable work in its built and conceptual projects, in urban design, education, commercial, heritage, residential, installation and interiors. Hannah Tribe's design approach is energetic, optimistic, informed and rigorous. Recent projects include the design of a major school vision and campus master plan, master planning for a number of large residential and mixed-use developments, transforming a school sports hall, and the design of agile new classrooms and facilities to reflect new teaching pedagogies. Hannah has gathered a group of talented and skilled people around her to rigorously interrogate each of these projects and bring them to fruition. Hannah has taught at the University of Sydney, UTS and University of New South Wales, has sat on the New South Wales Chapter Council of the Australian Institute of Architects, and has been an invited juror on numerous awards panels. In 2020, she curated the Sydney Architecture Symposium and was recently appointed to the New South Wales State Government Design Review panel. I now welcome Hannah to give her presentation.
Hello, I'm Hannah Tribe and I'm joining you from the beautiful lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. This is my team. Bonnie Edelston said, "A group is a bunch of people in an elevator. A team is a bunch of people in an elevator, but the elevator is broken." Over the last 2 years, my team have demonstrated unbelievable agility, strength, courage and perseverance. They've been a source of support, comfort and humour for each other and for me. And all of this while delivering a ton of great work in a world that's like a broken elevator. I'm going to show you a snapshot of what we've been up to over the last 2 years with some recently completed work, some work under construction and some work that's on the drawing board. I've had some great conversations with the team about the projects and the practice, and I'll include their words in this talk. Let's start with Manu. Manu's a German architect who's lived in Sydney since 2007. She has oversight on many of the projects at Tribe. On one project, she just described her role as just watching everybody else do a good job, whereas on other projects, she's deep in the drawing and the working out. I love this photo of her where she looks like she's captaining some mighty ship and leading us all into a brighter and better future. I'll start with Manu's smallest project. It's one in a suite of small transformations at Askham School. But we need to go back in time to before Manu joined us, when we did these small projects at Kambala School. We had very limited budget but high aspirations to transform this gym into this, and some tired old classrooms became an agile learning centre. These projects led to some other tiny projects at Askham School, which Manu's been leading. This is the undercroft of the existing theatre. You can see the raked concrete soffit of the seating over, and it's been used as storage in an ad hoc way, and they were running out of space for their musical instruments. In Manu's words, we turned crappy undercroft storage into some piece of art from a different dimension. It was really exciting because it is such a small, tight brief, but it's really impactful. It talks about great transformations made from, how do you say in English? Spit and paper. The client was also open to doing something quite daring. There was such appreciation afterwards from the people who use the space and just love it, and it makes a difference to their day-to-day. Manu and I reflected together on our process internally. We'd been scratching away at drawings and making schedules of musical instrument sizing and so on, and ultimately we were just coming up with a series of cupboards. We took it out of the office, and in her words, the idea appeared through talking, instead of sweating over drawings. The solution is a solution for storage, but that's not what you see. It's immersive. I see this little project as emblematic of many of our greater concerns at Tribe. Firstly, the most sustainable thing we can do is to make existing buildings last longer. And we need to make people love those existing buildings so that they look after them and in turn they last longer again. These big schools often have 30-year master plans, and the focus is on the new buildings, the new architecture, whereas the old spaces are just left to the maintenance department. It shows that a bit of paper and spit can be used to deliver longevity and energy to the left-behind facilities. Secondly, it demonstrates an attitude of problem finding in our work. The problem the client gave us was to fit a lot of double basses and flutes under the theatre, but we established a new problem, the problem of creating a bold new identity for the music department, and perhaps a bit of overcompensation for the fact that they're wedged under drama. Thirdly, the process involved a lot of trust. There was the trust from the client established over time, and there was the trust in the process between Manu and me. A trust that if we took a walk away from the studio and we described what we were thinking to each other, there would be some alchemy in the space between our imaginations. That trusting creative collaboration is at the heart of our practice. This next one of Manu's projects is almost complete. It's a house that's been in the studio for a long time and has passed through many hands. Here in Hunters Hill, the site stretches along a contour looking north over the river. It has a thin plan with every view getting light and view, every room getting light and view. It's one of a series of projects I'll show today where it's absolutely an alterations and additions project, but it's so comprehensively altered that the final result needs to look like a brand new building. We inherit a set of tight constraints and the decisions of the previous architect. We inherit floor levels, construction methodology, and get pushed into some tight corners, and the project has to push all of that into some logical conclusion. Manu said, "When I think about that project, I think about that amazing stair. It's kind of similar to that Askham storage because it is a stair, but it's also not a stair. It's an abstract spatial experience. There's a similarity in there, even though it's totally different. It's really beautiful in that way that architecture can be abstract." She continues, "When you zoom out from there, it's an awesome house. Even though a lot was new, it is a renovation. The material richness is a reflection of the client. They like that very refined finish, but it has some quite raw moments. There are some interesting material tensions, like where the polished plaster or the stone meets the concrete. While it looks like a completely new house, we're able to keep and reuse as much existing fabric as possible. It certainly makes the project more difficult to build, but you save the building fabric, you save the waste, and you inherit a set of constraints that create a new and intriguing architectural tension. This next project is another that Manu inherited and shepherded to completion. On an amazing double block in the inner west, north facing to the rear, huge existing pool and garden. We demolished an existing 6-car garages and a really ill-conceived rear addition. The existing house is deeply kooky, and it had layers of renovation over and over again, starting just 10 years after it was originally built. Our new addition performs a bit of architectural Tetris, decreasing the volume while increasing the floor space. 3 new bedrooms occupy a new roof void with north-facing windows and a dramatic section promoting passive cooling through stack effect ventilation. And what did Manu have to say? Oh my God, it's so different, isn't it? It's very playful, which again is a reflection of the original house and of the client. I think there, so in this project, she's saying, the architectural tension is the highly detailed existing house with the crazy fireplace and the timber joinery and the pirate window ship. And then how does that sit with something that's contemporary and in its own language, while it also interprets the playfulness of the old house? It's very different from anything I've ever worked on before, she said. It's an expression of how personal Tribes projects are to the client. That kind of shines through if you design for someone and you're able to make that visible in the design. It feels like a fit for the character. I've always enjoyed that idea of somehow expressing the client in the house. Working for a client on their own home is an incredible privilege, and at its very best, the work can be a kind of non-figurative portraiture. Now I'll introduce you to Javier. Javier joined us 6.5 years ago. He left Spain during the global financial crisis and has been working away from home for a neat decade now. He's a talented architect and photographer. The next couple of projects are his, and he also shot them. He, Manu, Ingrid and Carolina are working together on this project in Avoca Beach. It's a large, multi-generational holiday house on an incredible beachfront property. The concept is one of erosion and addition. The ground floor volume is a prism extrude out of which we've carved internal courtyards. It has a defensiveness to the street, an openness to the view, and protected internal spaces. The first floor, on the other hand, is a series of little beach houses that are arranged in a kind of village on this new tabula rasa. I'll let Javier talk about it. He said, at Avoca, the whole concept is we're going to build this massive house, so how can we deal with this scale? That's why we did the platform that feels heavy, with the garden on top and the little boxes that feel broken. Then how we perforate the slab to make it feel more open. In spite of the scale, the client still wanted to have that beach house feel with white boxes and timber painted. He says the ground floor is more like a massive open space. It is divided, but from the entry courtyard, you'll see the sea. It's a succession of spaces that are organised and divided, but visually connected. He says that one of the organisation challenges was how to deal with the very long site and the very, very long corridor. It has openings and courtyards and spaces, so it doesn't feel like a corridor. That was my biggest concern in the early stages. And I remember Javier was very concerned about this. So I asked, what do you think now that it's almost complete, Javier? And he said, that's the thing. It doesn't feel like a corridor. It doesn't feel like you have 50 meters of corridor. You have courtyards and stairs and joinery, and all these things happen on the way. And upstairs too, the ceiling height changes. There are openings to the courtyard. He said it looks like a series of different spaces that are aligned and not like a corridor. The interior materials on the ground floor are more natural, he says, timber, cladding, natural stone. But upstairs is a volume composition. It's all in the same material. We've used full height screens to keep it monolithic and abstract. And Manu said, what I like about it is that there's a lot of effort in making it happen, but then it feels really effortless. It's an elegant beach house, but it feels fresh, like it's meant to be there. Is it inevitable? She asked. Javier's next project is in Mossman. This is another one of those tricky projects where alterations and additions are so comprehensive that the appearance of the final house is a new house. Nevertheless, it has to embed the logic and illogic of the previous design, and in this case, several designs and designers. With Mossman being what it is, a steep waterfront suburb with killer views and killer neighbours, it was important to remain wholly within the existing envelope. I'll let Javier tell you about this one. He says, one of the ideas is very similar to Evoca. Break the scale of the two-storey house and make it look like a small cabin on a lawn. The project becomes a platform with a void under where the communal spaces are. They are just organised by joinery and leftovers. The whole ground floor is organised by the stair and the kitchen joinery. The whole skin of the building is sliding doors. At the top are the private spaces. It feels like a little house in a garden. It has great views. The master bedroom has the views, but it's not completely open. It's still an intimate space. There is not a massive window for the view. It has a more private bedroom feel. Because the whole project is modest, he continues, we have this awning that is a bit more graphic. It gives a bit more organic shape. It gives a bit more fun that was very elegant, but it was definitely more fun with this awning in front that makes it different from anything you've ever seen before. This is another project of Javier's. It's the amalgamation of two semi-detached dwellings in Paddington. The site faces northeast to the rear, and it's a level above the rear lane at the rear. So this neat, perfect set of circumstances allows us to bury parking, services, and a rumpus room on the lower ground floor without increasing the bulk of the building. The western semi already had a roof extension, which allowed us to go up into the roof on the eastern one as well. We matched exactly the critical points and folded a new roof up to enclose 3 bedrooms, then folded it back down again to present the gable to the rear. Back to Javier, he said it was very exciting to build a house that size in Paddington. Amalgamating the houses gave us a rare sense of scale. The fact that the whole project is roof space, he said, a roof extension, gave us these interesting spaces. It all comes up from keeping rooms that were there and making the extension sensitive. Being able to have this connection, interior and exterior, is rare in Paddington. It gives you this outdoor feeling, especially with the pool next to the dining, with this detail where the pool fence runs in front. It feels very outdoorsy. An important part of the house is how we filter light everywhere. We have these louvers that give red light, the battens, reflections, and always the light is coming in an interesting way. It gives you something. That sounds cooler with a Spanish accent. The process, he says, it was great that the builder was completely on board with the design. He was the first one who wanted to make the house immaculate. He wanted to do what we wanted. He was always checking daily with calls and FaceTime, site visits to ensure that he was doing what we wanted. He was also very protective of the design. If the client considered changing something, he'd call us. So to have someone on site with trust, who trusts our expertise and our vision, it made the process so good. The clients were also the same thing, he says. And Javier concluded talking about this, saying that the process on site was perfect, to be honest, and it couldn't be better. You don't get to say that very often. Manu was also on this project. She said Paddington 2 is almost like a departure. If Dulwich Hill is playful, Paddington 2 has a more serious starting point. The original semis are less crazy and kooky. She says, we had a great builder, a great client, a great team on the project. I just got to watch everyone do a good job. I think it's important to note that while these things are all being built at the moment, Javier's also has, rather sadly, some significant works resting on what we call the wall of fallen ideas. These are projects or ideas that didn't get up for some reason or another. The project fell over, we didn't win a competition, the client didn't like it, we didn't want to proceed with the project. This is a house Javier worked on in the Southern Highlands for a multi-generational family. This is another alts and ads that looks like new, this time for a young family in Hunters Hill. Here's a brick apartment building we did in collaboration with Matthew Pullinger Architect. This is a defensive beach house in the bush in Vincentia. This is a house for an introvert in the suburbs. Here we're testing options of renovation versus new build for a house in Vaucluse. This hotel references the sculptural work of Rachel White-Reed. And this is a hotel in Surrey Hills. Also on Javier's Wall of Fallen Ideas is this competition we did where we were led by FJMT and collaborated with Candelapis Associates. It's at Central Station. We did the public realm in a new small-scale, human-scale tower. The new tower is a human-scaled location marker, and it's a kind of third friend triangulating the Central Station clock tower and the Marcus Clark Tower opposite. Done during the first lockdown, you can see how quickly we adjusted to the weirdness of empty urban spaces. We were interested in this carved singularity of material, a massiveness and monumentality, and we kept referencing the empty public spaces in De Chirico paintings, and we were also looking at Khan's Indian Institute of Management at the time. You can probably see that there. On reflection, we think this might not have been the most competition-winning combination of things. Javier made these beautiful drawings and renders and had this to say. The idea was to show it as more of a classic, these buildings that had elevations that were watercolours. There's an old building in my city that's a stone building in the centre. I remember in the second year of uni they showed us the project of that building. It was one sheet, ground floor plan, top floor plan, 2 elevations, 2 details, something like this. The elevation is very graphic. It's detailed, it's coloured, it's compositional. It was like a sacred document. I think that it is public and we are using stone, and it is noble and classic. It will be served for many, many years. It was proper to show it in a way you see old buildings shown. You wouldn't see a render of the QVB, you would see an elevation with a watercolour next to it. Something that would last, something timeless. Another competition that's sadly on the Wall of Fallen Ideas was looked after by Matt. Again, we were led by Richard Francis Jones and his great team at FJMT, and this time the competition team included Studio Bright and Polly Harbison Design. It's at Darling Harbour, big podium and tower. FJMT sliced the podium massing into a civic street grid. They did the big tower and the street-facing buildings and generously delegated the waterfront to the small firms. So here's a site plan. Polly did the little triangular jewel to the south. We did this middle bit, and Mel and Studio Bright did this bit in the centre. And here you can see our building flanked by Polly's on the left and a sneak peek of Mel on the right. Matt really enjoyed this process. He said, the collaboration was with like-minded architects and it felt like the sensibility was easy to communicate. Everyone was on the same page about doing something consistent enough but individual in our own right. The buildings had their own identity but enough commonality to hang together. Our design was largely an exercise looking at facades with a little bit of urban design for the laneways. The roof is also an elevation viewed from all over the west of the city. We have a fine filigree facade to the harbour and heavy masonry to the laneways. The spaces in between the buildings were crucial. The street and the laneways were considered, creating nice relationships from one building to the next with Mel and Polly and Richard's team. I'm still in Matt's voice, by the way. It was unusual because the collaboration was all on Zoom. Everything is about good collaboration, he said. Any good design proposal will be the result of good collaboration. So I asked him, Matt, what is it that makes collaboration good? What made this collaboration good? And he said, I enjoyed the critique. We did critique the buildings openly. Everyone was vulnerable with an openness to all ideas. No one was fixated on a single position. Always open to change and open to each other's critique. There was a natural intimacy and immediate trust. I think the respect was there as well, to be completely open to each other's suggestions. He then adds, he's really surprised, he's like, Mel actually did some renders for us. It was so generous and she was so open to producing and discussing and testing. There was just so much trust. There's the render that Mel did with her building on the right and ours on the left. He says there was no resistance in the competition. It made it fun and it was a joyful experience. Matt's other project is also a great collaboration, and this time with Matthew Pullinger, architect. For this project, they're referred to as Maddie P and Maddie A. The site is George Street in Sydney, right near Wynyard, on our city's most important street. The built context is characterised by beautiful, ornate sandstone buildings, giving a unique material and light quality to this end of town. Here's the site, and until very recently, this part of George Street was all bus lanes and exhaust fumes, but it's been radically transformed into an urban boulevard by pedestrianisation and the light rail. Our project includes the remnant heritage facade you can see, the space above and the space to the north or the right of this side. We've divided the facade into 3 rectangles that mirror the proportion of the heritage remnant, with the tower above hovering over a 2-storey void. Here's what Maddie P had to say about it. It demonstrates an attitude to commercial office buildings that needn't be big and glassy, an attitude to commercial office buildings that are contextual and polite, especially in that part of the city. It's a brief that was motivated by a desire for longevity. We brought some nice ideas about contemporary 21st century warehouse, long life, loose fit, great integration of structure, services and architectural expression, and then we joked along the way about it being the little building that tried too hard. It was trying to do everything. Maddie P, coming from the larger end of things, had this nice reflection on scale. He says, it's a lovely scale. It's the upper limit of a project that can comfortably fit in one person's imagination. Beyond this size, you have to start breaking it into packages. This is just the right size and complexity. It's like a module or a unit. It's an architectural, intellectual module. Maddie P and Maddie A both really enjoyed the collaboration. Maddie P says it was a stellar, perfect little collaboration. It goes to show that you don't need a big team. Small teams of talented people can achieve a lot. It was a delight, and remember, it does take hard work to collaborate. And what did Maddie A have to say about the collaboration? Again, this was a great collaboration, he says. We had aligned design and urban planning intuitions and intentions. There's an ease of communication and fun with Maddie P. It was a real pleasure. There was strong but unspoken trust in the decision making. I really enjoyed this process too. Again, there were those hallmarks that keep repeating: the openness, the trust, a kindness with each other, and a seriousness and a toughness with the work. There was an alignment on intention and a dogged patience with iteration. There was ambition setting and investigation that is an act of finding the problem that's worth solving. Maddie A said, I enjoyed the facade design exercise and the different treatments between George Street and Wynyard Lane through depth and materiality. We experimented with rhythm, scale, material composition. We played with the depth in the stone and projected the stone past the boundary. The design process was options testing. We had this fundamental idea about stone at the front and brick at the back from the very start. We were keen to use clues from the local context. The sandstone in that precinct is really appropriate for George Street. Brick is the material for the rear lane facade, where the rawness is appropriate. Matt went on, it was a great lesson for me designing in George Street. It was a different process than doing houses. I was designing on the oblique, where the oblique was more important than straight on. We were designing to be part of the street wall. He says, my hope with that building is that when you look at it on the oblique, it just looks like stone. The windows are pulled back so that on the oblique it is just stone. That would be a win. Speaking of winning, Matt and Manu are powering on with this house in Mossman. This house was once a 1930s bungalow, and then in the noughties something like this happened to it. And this is what we're doing. Matt says, Mossman is a really interesting exercise in new intervention into an existing house. A unique part of the project is the way we get a brand new house formed up out of an existing building. Fundamentally, the old house is still there, but we end up with a much more intimate connection with the site. We push car parking back from the street into a new basement layer and remove the street wall. The condition of the house meeting the street is completely different. It is now much softer, mounding landscape that's more friendly to the street. We've designed something friendly to the neighbourhood instead of designing in isolation and inward looking. So we flip to the section so that the communal spaces of this house are on the top floor. They enjoy the view south to Balmoral and connect down to the garden rather than up. Or as Matt put it, orientation-wise, the project is about bringing in the northern sun to a house that has a southern view. Basic principle 101. Light is dealt with really nicely, he says, with the scooping ceilings. It's not so interested in direct, but rather diffuse light through that living area. Materially, the project is nice, he says. There's a contrast between the finer elements and the rough brickwork. We've left the brickwork crude, and it contrasts with the precision metal elements externally and the stone on the inside. This project's beauty, he says, is its relationship to street, materiality, and the scooped-in light on the top floor. Mana's on this project too, and she's really enjoying the process with the builder. She said, what I really like about this project is the process. It's probably quite outstanding to have a builder like Sustainable Design and Construct on the project. Sean drives a process that I have never experienced before. He is so prepared. Everything is planned out minutely. The builder sends us these mad SMSs with all the crazy photos from site and full essay-length reports. It's really special. We're also really enjoying the builder's outstanding commitment to sustainable practice on the site. Combine this with a client who really embraces that. They're a match made for each other, so that's really enjoyable to see the builder work so precisely and for the client to appreciate it. Now I'd like to introduce Farnham. Farnham's working on these two radically different projects in the office with these two architects, Rash and Louisa. Let's start with the Grand Dame. She's an old arts and crafts beauty located in Bellevue Hill. Traditionally, arts and crafts houses are inward looking. They're kind of hermetically sealed against hostile UK environments. They have small windows so that they're easy to heat in cold climates. We don't know who the original architect was, so we've looked at B.J. Waterhouse's work and the contemporaneous merchant houses on Cremorne Point for clues on how to treat this building. But we also know that those architects were looking at Lutyens. And Lutyens was looking at Palladio and Wren and the vernacular. This period is intentionally and willfully idiosyncratic and very clear about interiority. So that interiority thing is obviously a bit of a trick here in Sydney, where the weather's glorious, kids are in the pool or they're hurling themselves off things in the garden, when we want to eat and cook outside for most of the year. Our project is to create a new ground floor that connects the beautiful old living spaces to the new landscape by Jane Irwin. The lower ground floor is a great big plinth and a planted stair. It conceals the services, the kids' spaces, and you come down it to connect kitchen with garden. The ground floor in the middle there is extended to include this new ambiguous room. It's treated with an arts and crafts level of detail and play, but it's top lit, it's kind of wall-less, and it creates this giant threshold condition under the extended gable roof. The top floor is an extension of the roof language. Careful not to scare the neighbours, it preserves the neighbouring sight lines and profiles when it's viewed from the public domain. Shingled gables fold into balconies at new north-facing bedrooms, and the whole thing is held up on a giant off-form concrete beam. Farnham says, "It's a beautiful heritage house and a bold contemporary intervention. There's so much detail, and it's so different from Bronte, the other house he's working on, which is so pared back and modernist in approach. Here it's the intricate detailing combined with the bold design that interests me on the project," he says. "The detailed interior work feels like quite a unique opportunity to add a new layer to something that's already special. The external works, these are divided really clearly in two. There's the rectification and restoration of this beautiful old house, and then there's the bold addition. So it's an interesting range of things within one project. For me, having worked on more modernist houses and only a bit of heritage, this feels like next level. And happily, there's a complementary relationship between our client and her vision, our approach, and the builder's expertise." Arash reflected, "With this project specifically, the uncovering has been really interesting. Seeing how the house has been put together, like the stone rubble walls behind the beautifully finished sandstone, and recycled bits of railway infrastructure used as structure under the house. The kind of old school construction techniques that are a combination of make-do and very fine craft. Our architectural response is pretty awesome," he says. "Beautiful off-form concrete meshed with the original details. The kick of shingles, the back and forth talking with the old and new. I'm really excited to see that come together. For me, I think that the key to heritage work is that close attention. The writer Iris Murdoch said, 'Paying attention is a moral act. To write truthfully is to honour the luck and the intricate detail of being alive.'" Arash designed the new front fence. He says, "I tried to get that expression of the craftedness into the fence. I found it initially challenging, but this process of tweaking and reiterating, it was like uncovering. It's as if the design itself is there. We are pushing the sand away to find the project. As if it's a different process. We're revealing instead of generating." I really love that. It reminds me of that famous quote from Michelangelo. "Every block of stone has a statue inside it, and it is the task of the sculptor to discover it." To wrap up on this project, on a side note, we always warn our clients to expect the unexpected during construction. No one expected the bombs. Farnham's other major project is on a steep site in an old quarry in Bronte. There's a 6-storey change in level from the street at the south to the street at the north. Cars come in from the back, creating the improbable condition of a garage suspended 5 stories in the air. It has views to the north and northeast over Bronte Valley and Bronte Beach. The house itself is conceived as a block of brickwork, like a singular mass that's been carved out to connect north view and light to the south garden, and to create secondary spaces in the thick wall conditions to the east and west, so there's maximum visual and acoustic privacy, maximum air, light and view. Louisa said, "The use of raw materials is something that I like a lot. The not covering, not painting, not cladding, not adding on." And Farnham added on, "When I talk about this house, I always use the term no hiding. Every surface is expressed. We have to get everything right. The house is very expressive and honest, so we must tread very carefully." He continues, "We're doing a lot of different things with bricks on this house. Interior expression, exterior expression, curved stair, seamlessly continuing curved walls onto straight planes, brick screens, suspended bricks from soffits, and brick tiles on the roof. And once again, that's a completely different way of thinking about bricks. In the design resolution, the challenge is to bring it all together." It's interesting that in a house that's so honest, the brick soffits and brick tiles on the roof are decorative. We're getting those punched out or carved out portions to read seamlessly. He says it's really interesting to contrast it with Bellevue Hill, where there's a lot of materials and so many details, and it's so completely the opposite. I asked him, "So what's it like working simultaneously on 2 projects with completely different ethoses?" And he said, "Actually, I think it's nice. I feel like I'm drawing on different parts of my brain or skill or experience. Each project is a break from the other. They relieve one another in a way. The diversity on project typology, even within the small scale, is a nice thing. A new build from scratch and a significant heritage alts and adds. They kind of relieve one another. Louise is enjoying the relationship with the builder. She says, here she is on site. The builder is very much on board with design, and he is very helpful and perfectionistic. This makes a huge difference, having the builder involved and caring about all the little details. What I feel is we are very humble, builder and architect. We don't impose. We are always open to listen to each other's opinion. Most of my experience, it has not been like this. We also had an incredible collaboration with an artisan builder and a great client at Glebe. The house is an extension to a Victorian bungalow in the Toxteth Estate Heritage Conservation Area. Matt came onto this one late, working on the kitchen and some fanciful details. He says, there are 3 things in this project. I love in this project the treatment of the laneway and making car parking something else that was a cool outdoor space that spills onto the laneway. Again, it's friendly to the street, with the gym also opening to the laneway. Then the additional roof form at the back of the existing house does awesome things with light. It makes a pink glow reflect off the terracotta tiles. The big light baffle is a really successful move. A beautiful space, he says, is going to come down to its play of light. The third cool thing is the cool light fittings. I mean, the kitchen island is awesome from a material and sculptural point of view, but the strategy of the light fittings is even cooler. Not chasing wires into heritage fabric, it's a completely different approach. They become sculptures as well. We turned something purely functional into something sculptural, which was nice. And I also like the bathrooms, he says, with the brass reveals to the windows inside. I love how they played with the proportion of the actual openings. The one over the bathtub is partly infilled with mirror. It completely changed the proportion of that existing window in the room. When I looked at it, I didn't actually read the existing proportion anymore. The new brass arch recentered the whole composition on the wall. Marnie didn't work on this project, but sees it as an extension from the other heritage projects where we extend the playfulness in response to the original fabric and character of the house. She says it feels like going to a wild 1980s party. For me, I guess I'm interested in how this project extends the logic of the Victorian, the finding of frill in some pragmatic need, the way a decorative cornice covers up a construction gap. We tried to enter into that spirit of exuberance. We were just covering stuff up, but we could do it with a spirited, honest, dishonest sense of play and joy in the artifice. So now we'll pair it back again with this final project. It's a simple little box. Sited on a suburban street in Bundeena, which is a little seaside hamlet in the Royal National Park south of Sydney. It's planned simply, wrapping around a central courtyard. It's a quiet, modest little beach house. Kind of like a palate cleanser in the suburban streetscape. There's a bit of rigorous arithmetic in the set out. We had some fun with endemic planting in the courtyard. And this artwork by Gemma Smith inspired an exploration in the house with colours that we call bright neutrals. I'm including it here so that I can show the team there in Christmas 2020. Here they are for my conclusion. So how to conclude? I saw the writer Jennifer Egan speak at the Sydney Writers' Festival a few years ago. She described the process of separating her writing self from her editing self in her work. The writing self had to gallop ahead, generating the work intuitively at great speed, such that the editing, critical, negative brain didn't slow her down with whys and wherefores, doubt and reason. That part came later. I feel like we've been doing that for 2 years. We've been galloping ahead, generating ideas, generating good problems to solve, making drawings, building things, trusting our experience, trusting our intuition, trusting ourselves and our team, observing deeply and morally, and being playful. So collating these projects and reflecting on the changes in how we work since COVID and trying to editorialise is perhaps premature. I certainly don't feel like I'm ready, so again, I'm going to rely on the team. Matt talked about the impact of trust on his professional development during lockdown. He said, lockdown was interesting because it changed the way we communicated with each other. I was nervous being at home by myself, having to figure things out at first, kind of being forced into it. Then I thought, oh, okay, let's just do this. And over time, I ended up loving the idea. I gained a lot more confidence. I felt trusted to take things away and work them out. That feeling of trust just changed everything for me. And Javier said this about our work. We don't really have a style. We don't use the same references or ideas always. It doesn't give us any constraints. One of the things I like more about Tribe. Compare Avoca with Glebe. They have nothing to say. Roseville and Vaucluse. They look like they're from completely different architect companies. I asked Javier if he thought it was a good or bad thing working without a style. He said, you don't have the constraints of a specific style from the company. You take a project and you can suggest what's best for that specific site or client. It makes you free. You know, it is much easier to have a style, Hannah. Take a site, take a plan disposition, apply the office style, and you have your project. So Javier, I asked, if our projects are not unified by a style, what does tie them together? They have been done, he said, with a lot of freedom. Manu had a different point of view. She really enjoyed this process of being interviewed about the projects. And she said, looking back and seeing the projects and seeing how they're connected and they're different, while there's really a very large variety of things, there are siblings in there. Avoca and Bundina, Hunters Hill and Paddington, Dulwich Hill Glebe, Instrument Storage, Glamorous Stair. And what were Manu's parting words? She said, it's a great team. We allow for a variety of voices. It's fun and interesting to find the elements you want to work with and to be inspired by. I think it's really great that you can work in a way where you let everyone's strengths shine. That's when it works well, and it feels easy and effortless. I don't know about you, but after the 2 years we've had, I say bring on easy and effortless, bring on fun and freedom. And in the meantime, I want to thank the whole Tribe team, not just the people I've spoken about here, for their ongoing trusting and creative collaboration. I couldn't be stuck in a broken elevator with a better bunch of people. Thank you. Hi, Stephen. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Thank you for your warm, beautiful, heartfelt presentation.
That's a kind thing to say. Thanks for having me.
No, it was great. So I've got a number of questions. Let's get going. You wrapped your talk around your team members and the importance of collaboration. But in that presentation, you kind of pulled yourself out of it a little bit. I'd like to hear your thoughts on the idea of collaboration with your team, with your clients, with your builders and others.
I think there's something really magic about collaborating and working together, particularly creatively. I've been doing a lot of reading about the creative process written by authors in lockdown, particularly when how we worked was changing so rapidly. And I think what we do as architects is so unusual because we collaborate as a team, we collaborate with clients, we collaborate with builders, and something happens in the space between us, between two imaginations, which is quite different from autonomous art creation in, say, literature or visual arts. And I think at Tribe, we rely a lot upon figure ground diagrams, and we work in solid and void when we're drawing at 1 to 200, and we're always referring back to the Nolli plan of Rome. And I think that idea about presence and absence, or the space between things, is a really powerful metaphor for how we think about collaboration. So what that might mean in practice in the team is if somebody's working on something or drawing something and they hit some kind of creative roadblock, we might draw together. Or if that's not working, then maybe they describe it in words. In the translation, something else happens. In order to really lean into that, you have to remove self. You have to lean into the idea of the space in between, which is why I've removed myself from my own talk.
You're in that space in between.
I'm making the space between us right now, Steve.
Yes.
It's not about me, it's about this.
No, but it's a really clever way to deal with that team, the collaborative process and how each of those individuals come together in that process. When we were talking before, you mentioned this alchemy. And how does that alchemy work with the clients and with the builders and others that you work with?
Our job is to be the chief imagination officer, right? And if we can harness the strategic and technical ability of the builder and the hopes and aspirations of the client, then we'll get a fantastic outcome. So being able to kind of create the energy in the space between those three parties is what will get a good outcome.
To me, you seem to have a strong attitude to each place, even if it's not overt, because each one is different, and you're trying to create a new place out of the existing conditions. Would you like to elaborate a little more about what you think you're doing in terms of the place of each of those projects?
That's a great question. About 5 years ago, I went to Tokyo for the first time, and I'm a huge fan of Japanese architecture, in particular, a lot of new Japanese houses that had been made at the time. And I realized that they'd all been photographed in isolation, the flat elevational photograph, and you can't see any context. But it was when I was in the noise and the visual noise of Tokyo that you'd see these really singular conceptual works as this palette cleanser or a kind of fisherman's friend in the noise of Tokyo, that I realized that they were not just amazing pieces of intellect and imagination, but they were so particular as a response and contrast to sight. And so when I came home from that holiday, we stopped doing conceptual white boxes and started looking closely at context in that way that Iris Murdoch says it's a moral act to observe and then to make and honour what you've observed. And I think that plays into the new New South Wales Connecting with Country framework, that this idea of place is absolutely critical to who we are as Australians, and we need to lean in and look and listen.
And that idea of place also is informed by each of the existing forms of architecture that you're working with. And they're quite different in the projects that you showed. Your response is sensitive to each of those buildings and then layered with the wants and needs of the clients. And that's a really special thing too.
I'm just becoming such a heritage nerd, but not in a very academic way. I try to understand the ethos of the building and the time. I think the Victorian's really fascinating because it's all prefabricated stuff, right? And yet it couldn't look less like a modern building. But ultimately people were buying weird urns and mouldings from catalogues, and a whole bunch of plaster would appear and they stick it on. So in construction and ethos, in one sense, it's really proto-modern. But then in appearance, it's all about covering up. And it's about every time you cover something up, you kind of do like a big frilly dance on it. So it's opposite to my education, which was about, Sydney School honesty of materials, no cornices or skirtings or anything, no figures in the architecture, a real abstraction and honesty. So it's fun to play with the Victorian building and to try and dip into that ethos. What would it mean to cover up and have a tap dance about it?
Well, speaking of tap dance, you're playing this dance between the old and the new, and you're having fun with that, but in a very sensitive way. That's really, really quite special in the projects that you showed.
Well, thanks, Stephen. I think heritage is really fraught in Sydney. Often we encounter local government authorities where to do anything to a heritage building is seen as a kind of travesty, like a radical eradication of culture, and there's this moral outrage that we would do it. And I find myself, like, I love heritage work. I love kooky old building. I'm really interested in construction. And I'm in these meetings defending myself, like, don't worry, you won't be able to see what we're doing. It'll be invisible for the public domain. And I just really wonder, why can't we have a system that allows attempts to make the heritage of the future rather than to be so kind of ashamed of our own time?
Well, exactly. You know, why couldn't you be as exuberant as they were?
Yeah.
But in your way.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's what you're trying to do. But I think you're creating a nice balance, and hopefully we can keep that up.
Let's shift the dial, Stephen.
Yes, yes. Well, you've started. Another point, I believe that great architecture is about creating a spatial experience. The abstract spatial experiences that you've created, can you elaborate on your attitude to architecture and experience?
I think our new projects are engaging with that idea of abstract spatial experience more, whereas the old are really figurative. They're really expressive construction. They have strong figures appearing. Whereas in the newer projects, we can play with sculpted form. We're very interested in light in space, light moving around space. And I think for me, both are delightful, right?
But it shows you've learnt from the projects before and you're evolving.
Look, I hope so. It would be dreadful to go backwards.
Yeah, so those experiences are being teased out. Like when you were quoting your staff member about the project up north somewhere?
Avoca Beach.
Avoca Beach, yeah, where there's that corridor, but it's about the experiences along that corridor. That was really beautiful.
I loved how he described that, because it was like a string of aligned spaces or something Javier said about it, rather than a corridor, which is stolen. So Wilkinson was really good at that.
There you go. Learning from the past. That then leads to a question about details and materiality, which is becoming more and more evident in the work. And you mentioned some artistic references to Chirico and Morandi, but there was also some Scarpa detailing in there. There was a tiled floor that you didn't comment on in Paddington 2, and there are other references, and you referenced Khan as well. Tell me a bit more about your attitude to detail and materials and referencing.
I think building things is really fun. You're putting materials together and making something new where previously nothing existed. And it can be a way of engaging with architects we really admire from the past and being part of this big, long conversation about what it means to be human. I mean, ultimately, that's what architecture is, right? So how do we engage with that conversation with the past, and how do we hopefully leave something, a little tiny bit of something meaningful about us for the future? And I think those little detail references are, in jokes. They're fun. Yeah.
But you're careful about how you put them together. Not everybody knows how to detail. So.
Well, the people in the office would say that Hannah doesn't know how to detail, Stephen. So
she's helping you out. They're helping you out, and that's the beauty of collaboration in another sense. And I must say, you've seemed to have formed a really good, strong team.
Our team's fantastic. That's not to say I think there's this great resignation going on. We've lost a lot of team members through the lockdowns and so on. And I was just, as I was talking, I was like, oh my God, I haven't credited all the people who've worked on all these projects. I'm talking about team, and I'm missing all the people who've left. But we do have a really strong team. And I think I talked a lot about trust. I think there's that funny thing that happened when we all went to work from home. I can't remember who said it. It was some clever architect. And they said it wasn't that we didn't trust them before. We just never thought that we don't have to work in this industrial way. That we, you know, be clever architects, 6 years of education, professional degrees, adults, and then suddenly in lockdown, that was the first time we genuinely had to trust each other, and it was fantastic. People blossomed, and I think that's been really, really incredible.
That's good. Yeah, you've grown from that. You've mentioned the word fun quite a number of times, which ties to an old notion of firmness, commodity and delight. How important is it to you to infuse your projects with delight?
I think it's really important to infuse the project with delight and the process with delight. I think, you know, it's hard yakka, right? Buildings don't want to get built. As a team, one of our most valuable resources is optimism. And so we need to have fun as a team, but also fun drawing buildings, fun making buildings. Who doesn't like fun? Does it make it less fun when Vitruvius calls it delight? More serious?
Well, maybe they didn't use the word fun back in those days.
Do you think? Yeah.
Delight was it.
Delight, that was... Delight's good. I mean, I think, yeah, I suppose, you know, with your more abstract spatial explorations, you might not call them fun. The fun seems to talk more to the whimsical, perhaps.
Because there's delight in more subtle things.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
On the George Street project, you mentioned, you made one of your quotes was that small teams of talented people can achieve a lot. Unfortunately, some clients don't understand that. How did that work out on this project?
Well, that was Matthew Pullinger saying that. It was just been such a great project. So it's not built yet, obviously. It's we got the DA
But it's
approved.
a real project.
It's a real project. DA approved just before Christmas. It was a very small team. There was 3 or 4 of us only. I think when you can do it in a 3, there's something magic in it. You get the kind of instigator, antagonist, a momentum person, and a doer. So that worked really well. All sharing those roles at different times, or you know, switching hats, and it was a really good fit.
Yeah, it's a nice thing to learn that that's possible and show that it's possible.
Yeah.
So hopefully the project will move forward and you'll be able to take it to others and say, look, these things can happen. You know, you don't need huge teams of people. You don't need big corporate firms to create great architecture in our cities.
Yeah.
I think that's a very healthy lesson for us all to learn, and perhaps a good point for us to finish up on. So Hannah, thank you very much for a beautiful presentation and a wonderful conversation. And I hope our audience has enjoyed this evening. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you, Hannah and Stephen, for a really entertaining discussion this evening and for making tonight possible. Brickworks is always appreciative of the time and effort that goes into preparing for events like this, and I hope everyone has enjoyed watching it as much as we've enjoyed putting it together. So thank you to everyone for tuning in tonight. Please make sure that you regularly check the Brickworks website for what's new and to subscribe for invitations to more upcoming events like this one. Again, thank you and good night.